watching in the battle, yeah. Say what you want about me, yeah, but I'm a living in the green world, and I need the air to breathe. Some will say you gotta get your kicks by removing love from a natural chip. But metal will rust and money will burn, yeah. And on the final page I ask, were you living in the green world? And did you give some in return?
We are an organization made up of a lot of different interests and experience and participation level. I started as a volunteer and then got on staff a few years ago, and so I always like to kind of bring that up because not everybody, including staff at BARC, knows everything, and so there'll be moments where I'm like, I don't know, and hopefully somebody else is going to know the answer, but so feel free to ask questions, and if I say I don't know and you know the answer, please say what you think it would be, because I like that better. I always like learning something on these too. Wow, that was awesome. So BARC is a watchdog group. We focus on Mount Hood National Forest, and we monitor the timber sales mostly out here. We also work on some other issues that come up about Mount Hood. There's a lot of different users of Mount Hood National Forest. People come out here to go hiking like us today. People come out here to hunt, to fish, to birdwatch, to ski. People do all sorts of things out here. There's also logging companies that use this to get, well, we'll talk about that actually as we go. Recently there has been an effort by the Forest Service to start looking at other opportunities to bring in income. And the Palomar pipeline, which is the issue that we're kind of looking at today, is one of those new projects that they have going on. And so one of the things that we're learning right now, we've been for about 10 years monitoring timber sales and understanding logging practices in the National Forest System. So this is really new for us, and even though there is a component of it that is going to require logging, the actual issue itself is actually quite new for us, and we're going to wait until the first stop to really talk a lot about that. But essentially there's a 40-mile pipe that's going to go through the middle of Mount Hood National Forest along the Clackamas River, and in order to lay that pipe it will require a clear cut, and actually that clear cut will stay clear for as long as the pipe is there in order to access it for maintenance. So it is a very large clear cut, and when we get to the actual area where it will be crossing, you'll see some of the trees that it will be taking down are quite large, and there are some other areas that it will be passing through old growth forest. And so in some ways this is pretty similar to some of the projects we've worked on, but in other ways this is really new. Like the issue behind it is very different than something we've ever done before, and so we're really learning as we go. This hike fell on a weekend where there's a big conference down in Eugene, and so a lot of the people who work on this issue are at that conference right now, which is too bad because I was hoping they could come on it. But there are a lot of people working on this issue who have a lot of information, and I've been learning a lot from them. Most of the campaign has been focused on the coastline of Oregon, where there's these terminals that the natural gas is going to be produced, and then it will be piped to existing pipeline in eastern Oregon, and that's why this pipe is having to be built. And again, we'll talk some more about that. I'll discuss more about, you know, kind of ways that Bark stays involved with this stuff, but I think we'll just get going to kind of warm up and get hiking. Basically, we're just going to walk up this road to the trailhead, and then we'll hop on the trail for a while and go until we get hungry for lunch, and then we'll follow the trail to the campground and come back around on the road. So we're heading south right now. The road is over there. This is the Clackamas River, and we're going to be walking along the Clackamas for most of this time. So just so everybody knows, that's the river that we're looking at. Well, there's a better place for us to all round up and talk some more coming up. So, but I wanted to point it out. So I'm going to do a quick overview of what this pipeline is about, and if people have questions, stop me, because this stuff is a little bit, there's just a lot of parts to it, and I still have not, I've practiced talking about it some, but I sometimes feel like I'm getting too complicated. People know about natural gas. Do people know natural gas is this type of fuel that we use to heat homes? And at the moment, there's this proposal to have natural gas come from Russia and Indonesia and some other places across the Pacific. And the way it would get here, it would come on ships in this liquid form, which is an easier way to keep in a container than have it in the gas form, which is how we usually get it to customers. When it gets to the United States, they need to have these terminals, these big factories basically, where they re-gasify it. And that process, so the boats come in, these massive boats come in every day from other places across the Pacific. They go to these terminals, and the liquid goes through this gasification process, and then the gas has to get piped to the customers. So that's the basic kind of steps. Along that way, there's a lot of points where people are having concerns that even though natural gas is viewed as this alternative energy source, the process of getting it to a customer is actually so energy intensive itself that the carbon footprint, which is this kind of like phrase we're throwing around a lot these days, which is basically like how much stuff and how much carbon emission does it actually take to use whatever you're using. So maybe you're using some green, version of the product that you're buying, but actually the process of making that product was so intensive that maybe it really isn't as good for the environment as you think it is. So that's one of the big problems with this proposal, is that people are kind of like, well, is this really a good alternative energy source? And as well, when the boats come in to the river, they're coming in, the terminals that we're mostly thinking about are the ones up in Astoria that are proposed for up in Astoria. There's a couple down in southern Oregon that are also being proposed. The other ones that are really contentious right now are actually down in Baja, and those have already been put in. They have caused all sorts of, there's been some studies on the environmental damages that those have caused, and the pipeline itself, which is coming up to customers in California, which is where most of the customer base is for this type of natural gas, has been attacked repeatedly, and there's actually been instances of the pipeline exploding, and all the things that we keep talking about happening have actually happened down there. And that's unfortunately something that hasn't been very well covered in the media.
Was that accidental or a sabotage?
They think it was a sabotage, actually, from people who were against the pipeline. So right now there are not any of these terminals on the Oregon coast, but there's 5 that have been proposed. And the one that we are dealing with the most, the pipe would have to connect, it would come down through a lot of private lands. So the government uses eminent domain. Basically, we need this land, we're taking it from you, we'll give you a fair market value, but you don't really have any choice over the matter. So it will go through a lot of private land. There's a lot of farmers who have been organized around this, trying to stop this from happening, because even though there might get some reimbursement for the land, there's some really interesting organizing that's been going on around the fact that the pipeline would actually intercept all these really important water, what's the word I'm looking for?
Watersheds?
Yeah, not only the watersheds, but the actual why?
Water rights?
No, getting the water into the farm. Why am I having irrigation? That's the one I'm looking for. It would screw up all these irrigation systems that are set up on the farmland. So why can't I think of that word? And then once it finally gets to about the Molalla area, it takes a sharp turn towards the east and starts to go across Mount Hood National Forest. And we haven't really gotten into this, but Mount Hood National Forest is public lands, meaning that taxpayers own it. We are supposedly part of the decision-making process about what happens on the public land, and so that's why we're starting to engage in these 40 miles, really looking, is this okay for this pipeline to be going across Mount Hood? It's crossing several major river systems. Fish Creek is actually one that we crossed over on 224. That's a major watershed. The next one would be Clackamas. It then crosses the Oak Grove, and it doesn't actually cross the White River on the east side of Mount Hood, but it actually goes along it. So it's getting very close to several major river systems, not to mention the hundreds of streams that it's crossing, which funnel into those river systems. There are several different ways that they actually lay the pipeline down into a river system. As far as I understand, and again, I don't know this completely, but there's a woman, Brenna, who works at Willamette Riverkeeper. That's one of the groups that's working really hard on this campaign, has been doing some research on it, and what she thinks is going to probably happen is they're going to dam the Clackamas for a period of time while they lay the river down, the pipe down, which I really don't understand how that's going to happen. And it will actually be under the river. It will be buried. And then it will come back out. And so there's points where it will be above ground and then points where it will be below ground. It's also it's crossing major river systems. It's also crossing several trails. This trail is one of them. The Pacific Crest Trail is another, which is a famous trail that people do from Mexico to Canada. And it's also crossing what's called late successional reserves, which we are technically actually in a late successional reserve right now. And these are patches of forest where the Forest Service has said, okay, this is really special old growth forest. We're not going to protect this the way wilderness is protected, where we just leave it totally alone, but we're going to protect it in a way to make sure that it's actually spotted owl habitat is sort of the priority, that one special little critter that has done so much for us. But it's basically this one part of the forest where they're like, this is so unique and so special that it hasn't been logged that we want to make sure we don't totally overlog it. So it's actually passing through several LSRs, which is what we kind of call those things, but basically they're just the remaining old growth forests that are not protected. And the other thing it's crossing through, there's lots of other components of, or places that it's going to pass through, and maybe those will come up, but these are the ones that have been sort of on my mind the most. Right now the Forest Service is trying to deal with a growing ATV problem, which is like those quads that people drive on the farms. And I'm sure people are aware of it. We might even see them while we're out here. That's become so hugely popular in the last 5 years. I mean, it's just like that industry has exploded in terms of recreation. Like whereas before people would buy them for farms or whatnot, now as a recreation, it's huge. And on Mount Hood, particularly along the Clackamas, where you're getting residents from Estacada and some of the communities out there, this is really quick access to free area. You know, most private land you're gonna have to ask the owner if you can use it. Here they can just come and use the forest. So the way that they're kind of starting to have to deal with this, and one of the proposals they have is these, they claim that we called it this, but they started it, and I think it's actually a really good descriptor, so I'm gonna keep using it, but it's these playground areas. And it's basically these sanctioned, there's 6 of them, there's these sanctioned areas that cumulatively add up to about 50,000 acres of forest that will have extensive trail systems specifically designed for ATV use. So it'll have features that are attractive to motorized recreation as opposed to like a trail that would be better for hiking along. And these areas presumably will be pretty much the hot spots for people to go with their quads and their motorcycles. You can kind of imagine what that might sound like. It'll probably be really loud. It probably won't be very nice for hiking. And it's something that BARC's pushing hard on right now. We're not really sure if we're opposed to the idea of it, but we don't necessarily think it's a very useful strategy for keeping ATVs out of the national forest and out of pristine forest, because what we've seen is the whole point of off-roading is to not stay on the road or the trail. So the idea of like making this whole trail system, spending thousands and thousands of dollars to make a system for a user of the forest who specifically doesn't want to be on the trail seems kind of silly to us. But we're also like realize there's a problem and they need to come up with a solution. One of the things that we see a problem with is that there's 4,000 miles of roads in Mount Hood, and a lot of those roads lead into areas of the forest that they're using that they shouldn't be using. And if they started decommissioning some of these roads, it would create less access to areas that nobody's using other than to take their ATVs up and kind of camp and start to have trail systems going off of those roads. So sorry, back to the pipeline. The pipeline's going through one of these proposed play areas. So one of the other things that comes with motorized recreation, and this isn't a stereotype, it's a reality, is lots of guns and shooting. And a lot of people bring, either they're hunting, you know, they're just bringing their ATVs out and it's just deeper access into the forest for hunting, but also there's like sport shooting a lot of the times at some of the camping areas where they all congregate. And it gets pretty nasty. There's some areas right as you come into the forest where there's just shotgun shells everywhere. They shoot down trees. It's a mess. And I don't want to... What's that? And a lot of garbage. And I'm not necessarily proposing that guns shouldn't be in the national forest, but the idea of a pipeline going through an area that we know there's going to be a lot more gun use seems kind of sketchy. So I don't know. Again, we haven't seen... There's been very little... information provided to the public yet about what this pipeline's even going to look like. And what I'm curious about is specifically through that area, is it going to be above ground? And we don't know yet, but that's a question that I've had out to the Forest Service for a while. I think we'll keep walking. There's a lot more stuff to kind of go over about that. There's one of the things that's been really difficult about this project that's really different for us. Usually BARC deals directly with one agency, either the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management, which is another large agency that has holdings around Mount Hood where they log and do some grazing, like they'll let people bring their cattle there to graze. And so usually we just deal with that one agency, and we're either negotiating with them or working with them, trying to show them why what they're proposing is a bad idea. But with this project, there are dozens of agencies that are part of the process of getting this thing through. The organizing agency, the one main agency that's overseeing most of it, is FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And they are this body of government that is so complex to me. There are so many people in it, and I don't really understand how they operate. They're very hard to get in touch with. Whereas the Forest Service, I can call them up. I mean, if anybody's ever called the Forest Service, they're usually pretty nice. They're, you know, they like think of themselves as like out helping the public. When you call some of these, and also the Department of Energy is also really involved with this, and it's like calling the Citadel. I mean, it's like unbelievable. You cannot get a person on the phone. You can't get them to respond to emails. And it's been really difficult to get information. And every time I call the Forest Service, they're like, whoa, that's not our problem, that's FERC. They told us we're not supposed to answer questions. And so if I keep saying I'm not sure about this, I don't know, it's not that we're not working on it. It's like literally my job right now around this campaign has just literally been hounding them on the phone trying to get more information. So at the end, we're gonna maybe hopefully write some postcards or letters, and one of the things that could be in it is we need more information. The public needs to know what this thing is actually going to look like. So, but we'll talk some more about that as we go.
I got one question.
Oh yeah, what was the question before? Did I answer it? I can't remember.
I don't remember now.
Oh, what does the Forest Service have to do with this? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Did I kind of?
You kind of touched on that, really. I know that very few of the permits have been established in order to okay this whole project. But then again, they're already running the figuring out where the pipelines and everything are going. Who is that public money that's paying for all this surveying and all that?
Yep.
And they don't even know if it's going to go through.
That's a good point. Yeah. Well, one of the things, I mean, in order to have it go through, they do have to do the analysis. So, like for instance, we're going to see the flagging, and that flagging's been put down so that specialists can come out and look at this stuff. So in some ways, that's good money spent because they're actually looking to see what the environmental impacts of this are going to be. But you're right. It's always harder to argue against a project that they've already put money into. So it's always a little bit like, oh, is this only going to get harder the more money they're putting into it, the more they don't really want to admit that it's not a good idea. Another thing to consider is that even though this LNG issue is really contentious and hopefully we can stop it, there's no guarantee that that will actually stop this particular project. There's also, there's 11 other proposed energy corridors along the west, and they're much larger than this one. One of them just touches Mount Hood and actually is mostly along existing kind of, you know, when you're driving along some areas of Mount Hood and you see major power lines, PG power lines, I don't know if everybody's seen that. Those are actually been laid for a long time, and most of the proposal is just to kind of fix those up a little bit and have them have other types of energy sources going through, so it doesn't have a huge impact. But it is this thing that's coming up a lot, and I want to bring this up when we're sitting around at lunch and stuff, because I'm interested to hear what people think about this. Mount Hood is one of many national forests that is starting to realize we can't really make a lot of money off of logging anymore for various reasons. But there is this whole need for domestic energy. So there's been more of an effort on the national forest scene to start thinking about, like, do we have energy sources on our public lands where the government could be making money off of it, the public is involved in the decision making about what type of energy is appropriate. And with Mount Hood specifically, the thing they've talked about, you know, wind energy, you know, having turbines along like a route like this, or having solar panels, but also they've talked about biomass, cutting down trees to burn for heat and also to convert into energy source. So there is this sort of evolution that's happening on national forests where they're starting to think, like, is there domestic energy we could be gaining from these national forests, or these huge reserves of like beautiful areas that the natural resource has actually been, you know, spared, as opposed to a lot of private land. And BARC has been monitoring logging projects for many years, but we realize that it's kind of like they're changing, and so we have to start changing, you know, and what do we think about that? And I don't really know, you know, I know that I would love to fill up my, you know, tank or turn on my heat or whatever and not feel like I'm supporting some huge, major, terrible war. So I do want energy to come from a domestic source. Do I think that this is a good forest to be getting it from? I'm not really sure. So those are conversations that we're starting to have within the organization. This pipeline, like I said, could continue to, or the corridor, I should say, that the space that they're going to cut could be cut anyway just to be like a future corridor. And again, it's a big conversation. So why don't we I'll leave you with that and think about it while we're walking. And like I said, as we walk along the trail, if you see kind of an opening, you could walk up and take a look because it's really beautiful views.
Why don't they put the pipe along the existing roadway that goes from point A to point B on the coast to wherever they want to get it to? I mean, all the costs of tearing down the trees and going through the national forests and like getting out there to maintain it and all these issues that are potentially problematic. Why don't they just build it along the road?
Well, there isn't. For this one, there's not really a road.
Well, I mean, the Columbia Gorge.
No, that's a good point. I think that actually there's a moratorium on anything like that along the Columbia Gorge because it's protected as National Scenic, so they can't actually do projects like that there anymore, which is good because probably it would have been used a lot more if there wasn't that protection. Like, you probably would see a lot more infrastructure along that area. So this actually is, I mean, if you think about a pipe, this actually is a need. There are not any roads that cross over Mount Hood or along the Columbia that would be very efficient and it'd be like or straight. So that's a good question, but I think that that's pretty much why they have to do it this weird way through the national forest. So there's this big controversy going on. If people read articles about this, and it has been getting a lot of media, so I throw this out as always question the messenger, but one of the responses to this whole proposal is we don't want to have to bear the environmental burden of California's energy needs. And the reason people are saying that is because originally the proposal was to have these terminals along the California coastline, and Schwarzenegger actually came out very strong against them in support of the environmental groups that were also working against them, and they quickly basically just... And that's another good point. The governor of every state actually does have the veto power to get rid of them. In Massachusetts, the governor actually did successfully stop a proposal. California, same thing. So there's a lot of pressure right now on Kulongoski, our governor, to try to stop this. And we can talk some about that later on when we're writing letters if people want to do that. But so it's possible that they wanted to just keep it in Oregon because it's easier to sort of deal with one level of state legislature and not have it, you know, two different legislatures that they're dealing with. The other thing is it's closer to California, and the companies that are funding this keep saying, well, that's not true. People in Oregon want natural gas, you know, they'll use it, and Northwest Natural has actually gotten on board. But there actually is no proof that there is not been like people wanting it and not enough natural gas for people who want it. There is not a demand right now.
There's existing
demand.
contracts for all the needs.
Right, down in California, you mean?
Well, no, here. Here we have the...
Oh, yes, oh, right, existing ones already, yeah, exactly. And then on top of that, it's like the amount that they're proposing is going to be coming in will increase it by like 500%, I think is what it was, what it's actually coming in right now. So Oregon's not growing that fast. Like, we're not growing 500% to actually warrant that much more natural gas. So even if there was not an existing need, but maybe in a few years there'll be a big population growth and we'll need it then, it's totally unreasonable.
And we certainly wouldn't be sending it to Eastern Oregon.
Right, which is where the existing pipeline that goes to California is. So it's very clearly, at least for the short term, going to California market. And I think that that's a really touchy issue for a lot of Oregonians, because it's kind of like, you know, how come we're the freakish bastard child of, you know, like this, you know, it's like if they want it, they should have it on their coastline, and if they don't want it, then probably that means Oregon people don't want it too. And anyway, so that's a big part of this sort of strategy, and I think it's a completely justifiable excuse, although I have to say that the companies that have been working on this have their messaging down pretty pat, and it's hard to argue against it, because they basically say, well, people want it. If you want it, if you're going to buy it, we're going to have it. You know, you can't say you don't want it and then buy natural gas.
That's what got us into the mess we're in with petroleum.
Right. Yeah. And I think that there's some point where we just cut that off.
There's a lot of oil. I mean, I have an oil furnace in my house, and those are not great. So I would imagine somebody's out there making the argument that natural gas is so much better than oil, and so many people in Oregon might want to be upgrading, that's where the demand could be coming from.
Yeah, and actually they keep calling this the bridge fuel, because their view is people will make this, it's not such a huge thing to outfit your house any differently. You can get lines put down and get your tank, you know, shut off. And so that's why they call it a bridge fuel to alternative energy. Well, this was a bridge fuel 20 years ago. It's not a bridge fuel now. We don't need, like, we need to jump from natural gas.
Leap over the bridge.
Now. Yeah, it's like, this isn't, this is a
barrier.
So that's another response. I think it's a good point, though, that people are ready to make that leap away from, and so what are the other things? And that's why this conversation comes up in my head. Well, okay, so what if this corridor does get cut, but instead of a natural gas line, they put a whole row of wind turbines? And it would be really ugly, and they would have cut down all these trees. But maybe that's better. I don't know. I mean, that's literally a question that Bark is like, what do we think about that? So I agree that we need to make that jump, but I'm not really sure how to do it. Yeah.
I was recently talking to a good friend of mine. She's a CEO of Alliant Energy in Wisconsin, which is a very big energy corporation. She's about, well, I shouldn't say this in public, but her viewpoint was that there is no option. The only option is to stop demand. That is, we're at that point. She is a spokesperson now for pushing their new coal plant over there, and I think she's going to quit her job rather than push the coal plant. She's been there for a long time. So the idea is there an alternative? According to this friend of mine, there is no alternative except for to decrease what you're using.
It seems foolish to put all this time and energy into more, more foreign sources that we know are really not renewable and not sustainable in the long run.
Yeah, and as people keep pointing out as well, which is, I am always nervous about this argument, but it's been made that these are coming from countries, from people who hate us. Now, I actually was fortunate enough to go to Indonesia in January, and I can assure you that they don't all hate us, and it's not a terrorist breeding ground as the U.S. is trying to make it out to be. But it's true that a lot of the sources are coming from places we don't exactly have good relations with, and we regularly like to put sanctions on or go to war over. So I think that while I'm not a big fan of the idea of saying these people hate us, that's why we shouldn't be getting oil from them or gas from them. I do think it's a good point that it's not exactly the best places to be relying on energy sources from. So
well, the whole country doesn't have to hate us. Just a small segment of them that are against us could bomb and sabotage these facilities down the road after we become used to having that energy.
Yep.
Probably our own citizens would be more
likely
to do that, though.
Yeah, but it is a good point that like anybody who's angry enough, it becomes a pretty easy target. I don't know if has anybody seen pictures in the media of what the boats look like when they come in?
Yeah.
They have these huge white balls on them that's where the stuff is stored, and they're really like kind of so obvious. It's like a target. You could imagine somebody just being like, and I mean I don't know how that mindset really works, but the argument, it seems actually pretty good that it's like this is just a moving target going into a very small community along the Columbia. So
did you talk about how much energy it takes just to compress the gas?
Do you know some of the...
I know it's a lot. Like when you drill gas in Indonesia, when you compress it into the boat and then you get it back out in our pipeline, you only end up with maybe 2/3 of the original gas because it takes so much energy to supercool it and compress it into the boat.
Yeah.
And that's not even dealing with the issue of all the petroleum being used
to get the boat here. Yeah, and then also in order for the boat, let me see if I can explain this correctly. In order for the boat to turn around, basically it comes in and this happens every day, the boat comes in and then it has to turn around to get back out the river. There's something about the way that it's actually going to be turning. The boat is so large, and currently there's not any boats that are that large in this one part of the river. It's basically just going to like over and over and over again create these huge water turbines that are just going to completely mess up the river system. And it's going in, and the proposal, there's like a whole bunch of habitat there that currently exists for some salmon habitat. And again, I'm not going to get too into the details because I don't know exactly what it looks like. I haven't actually even been there yet. I've seen it from the other side of the river, but I haven't been to the actual site. But I know that that's a big issue. And then the terminal itself requires some insane amount of water usage, so it's going to be sucking tons and tons of water up every day out of the river and churning it through some of their processes that their cooling processes or something. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but I know that there's a huge water need from the companies themselves once the thing's up and running. That's another thing to consider, the water getting depleted out of the river system. So there's been a lot of fishermen against this, and it's
because of the dredging.
Yeah, because of the dredging. It's pretty interesting to see how this campaign, and I don't know, maybe we'll just talk about this later, but it's been amazing to see how many different groups of people have been touched by this and are coming out in protest against it. So
in a forest canyon, I thought to myself, this ain't the way we should treat our world. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. In a forest canyon, I watch the eagle
So they are marking
really?
the pipeline by an orange marker, by orange markers. There's a couple up on the road. I don't know if people saw the pink and red flagging. I'm not sure what that is about. Again, I've emailed them about whether they flagged it, and they didn't even let me know that they had. And I found this flagging the other day when I was out here. Typically, red means road. That's where they're going to put a road. So it seems likely that because there's red flagging up there, that maybe they're going to build some. It would probably be a spur road, like a temporary road, which we kind of don't really like that word because there's no such thing. Roads, once they're built, are there for a long time, no matter what you do. But I could imagine them doing some sort of skid trail going into this forest from up on the road to be able to pull the logs out. But I don't know what that's all I can imagine what that flagging is. The proposed sort of pipeline width is on average about 150 feet, but we know that they're going to have to do it much wider than that in some areas, particularly on the steeper slopes. I can't imagine that they would have to do, this is pretty flat and clear, so I can't imagine that they would have to log like a huge amount of this area, but I just don't know. We will follow these orange flags and at least be able to see, like, we know that at least, let's just assume 50 feet on either side. And you're going to see a lot of trees that it would be really unfortunate if they had to log them within 50 feet. Not to mention, obviously, and this might be obvious, but maybe it's really not that obvious, the amount of impact a logging project can have on a forest is pretty intense. Like, even if they're not taking out all these trees, once they take out several, you have trees susceptible to wind throw, so a huge gust of wind comes in, a storm comes in, and suddenly they don't have the protection of lots of other trees blocking the wind, and so probably on the edges of that route, you're going to have lots of blowdown happening where the trees blow down because there's more wind hitting them. You could also have invasive species coming in. Roads are really good travel routes for invasive species. They come in on the treads of your wheels, and then they'll just keep following wherever the road goes. So that's why you see a lot of Scotch broom, that yellowy, broomy looking stuff along the sides of a road. That's an invasive weed, and it will push into the forest. There's Himalayan blackberry, lots of stuff like that. So that could also happen along the route. And that would bring invasive species where, I mean, I've been sort of surprised. I haven't seen much in here.
I've seen some holly, I think.
Yeah, there probably is some holly. So, again, we can keep talking about the environmental impacts that come in with logging, but that's some stuff to start thinking about. So we're going to go off trail now. It's snowy like this, but it's also, you can see it's kind of spread out. Like, it's not, we're just going to go down to the river, which you can kind of see through the trees, so we can see where it's going to cross the river.
In a forest canyon, I watch the eagles sail. In a forest canyon, no place for them
This is where, at the moment, the pipeline is proposed to cross the river here. Again, like I said earlier, I'm not really sure how they're going to do it. It's kind of sad, even if they are to bury it, it's sort of sad to imagine this nice little peninsula area getting dug up. I'm not sure I don't know what that would look like. Of course, it would cross over onto the other side of the banks and go through those forests over there as well. The Clackamas River it has a designation called Wild and Scenic River, which basically means that they can't dam it. They're actually not supposed to permanently dam it. They're not supposed to do anything that puts harm onto the flow of the water. There's some other versions or things in that act that actually it's a pretty strong act, although it doesn't have a lot of... one of the things that makes an act or a law really strong is when it is brought to court and it's sort of like bullied around in court, and they say, well, this doesn't really make any sense, or this is really hard to interpret, and so they make new interpretations. And that Wild and Scenic hasn't really been put into court very often, so it's it's something that we really refer to because it means that the river has some really special qualities about it, and the Clackamas is certainly one of those rivers. So we're wondering how they plan to log this area and put a pipeline through it and not break wild and scenic. So that might be one of the few times we see it be put in court, but we'll see. And what was, oh, and the other thing I was just mentioning, I wanted to throw this out. Bark's perspective, which has really informed a lot of our decisions about how to grow out of timber sale monitoring, is Mount Hood is basically a very, very large reservoir. And when you look up and you see Elliott Glacier starting to melt and you see some of the snow coming off of the mountain around this time of year, that water is going into watersheds that go directly into our sinks at home. A third of all Oregonians get their water from Mount Hood, and that all comes from the rivers and the glaciers. So when we talk about water quality, we're not just talking about water quality for fish, and we're not just talking about water quality for the importance of the watersheds within the forest, but it's also like we're talking about our drinking water for reals. You know, it's like, it's not just lip service. So from Bark's perspective, we should be managing, if we're managing anything at all, managing these forests with the top priority being water. And that's a big issue when you start looking at things like logging and these proposed corridors. One other thing I forgot to mention that some people may know about, but in June we are going to try to hike all 40 miles of the proposed pipeline, and we haven't quite figured out how we're going to do it. I think there'll be parts, because some of it's pretty tough hiking. I've done a bit of it up around here, and it's pretty hard bushwhacking. So some of it will be kind of just like a small group of people who are just like ready to go for it, but then there'll be parts of it that we do want to have be kind of a public hike, and then we'll advertise where we're stopping for each evening, and if people want to meet up with us to camp, and that's going to be sometime in June. We haven't exactly figured out, probably in the middle of June, and if people are interested in that or want to join us, you can keep in touch with me. And also, if people want to get involved with us, I'm a good person to talk to about some of the stuff that we have going on, and I think we'll see how much time we have when we get back to the cars. But if people do want to take a minute and just write a short letter, I have some paper to Kulangasi. We'll put it together and send it to them tomorrow. And I usually just include like a cover letter telling them our actual route and including some pictures from what we saw today. But it's good to keep up pressure to him, and we've been doing a letter writing campaign to just remind him about who's out here and who's doing stuff, and
what his job is.
And what his job is. Thank you. One of the other things that Bark is doing right now is we're working on this campaign to try to get the number of roads taken out of Mount Hood. Right now there's about 4,000 miles of roads, and last summer we actually did a really great inventory of about 10% of those roads, and we had volunteers out doing surveys of what the impacts of those roads were on the forest, how the streams were passing through, whether they were getting blocked, and we found out a lot of really interesting stuff. We've been using that data to work with the Forest Service to come up with a plan for the next 10 years or so to try to take out roads instead of continuing to build them, because those have a huge lasting impact on the forest. And if people are at all interested in that campaign, we have a lot of really cool opportunities to get involved. And the best website to go to for that is mounthoodplan.org. And that has lots of information on it. It also, we've kind of started moving in this direction of trying to come up with some bigger vision of what people want to see happen in Mount Hood. A lot of people recreate here and live in Portland because of the access to Mount Hood, and so we've started doing some efforts to engage people on, you know, if we could have our way with what Mount Hood is and what it represents, how would it look, and what kinds of things should we be starting to push the Forest Service to prioritize, and you know, things like recreation, clean water. And so actually on mounthoodplan.org we started a collection of audio of people who have lived on the mountain or have experience on the mountain talking about it, and right now there's only 2 up, but we have a couple of others that we're going to post soon that are really great. There's one from this woman Kate she's 90 and she's been living on the mountain her whole life, and she's just amazing woman, and so she talks a little bit about that, and so it's a great site to go check out some of the stuff that we're working on with that campaign.
Oh, watching the battery. Say what you want about me, yeah, but I'm living in the green world, and I need the air to breathe. Some will say you gotta get your kicks by removing